Golden State Media Concepts bring you Book Review Podcast, a haven for bookworms of all ages and the widest genres, from mystery to memoirs, romance to comedy, fantasy to sci-fi. If you love to read, this is a podcast for you. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Sarah. It's Tuesday. We have another author interview. Before we get to that, though, I hope you had a great weekend, as always. Another quiet weekend here for me. Not much to report on, actually. Pretty quiet. Got some stuff done around the house. Hung out with the puppies, the usual. So, that was about the extent of my weekend. Hope your weekend was whatever you wanted it to be. At any rate, like I said, we have another author interview today. We're switching gears to nonfiction, a memoir this week, and the memoir is called A Way Back to Health, 12 Lessons from a Cancer Survivor. The author is Kelley Skoloda. And Kelley Skoloda was the healthiest person she knew until the day she became a cancer patient. During her first routine colonoscopy, without having experienced any symptoms, Kelley received a shocking diagnosis: colon cancer. Based on the true story of her subsequent cancer journey, A Way Back to Health reveals how surprising lessons paved the way for her recovery, shares helpful action steps for those who find themselves in a similar situation, and illuminates how personal stories can powerfully motivate and heal. In addition to telling her own story, Kelley also features examples of how other amazing survivors have learned to manage, survive, and thrive in the face of cancer. She also explores how often overlooked actions, such as trusting your instincts, speaking up, getting a second opinion, and watching for miracles, can have a profound impact on recovery. Lessons meant to help patients advocate for themselves and help friends, family, and caregivers as they wrestle with cancer and its treatment. Cancer will affect 1 in 3 people directly and many more indirectly in their lifetime. A Way Back to Health, with its real-life stories and unexpected lessons, is a helpful and relatable guide to the most important information you need to know about cancer for the time you need it most. And so, again, that is the description of A Way Back to Health, 12 Lessons from a Cancer Survivor. Again, the author is Kelley Skoloda, and it is partially her story of survival, but also ways that she managed her time with cancer, things that she learned from her time with cancer, and things that she thinks can be helpful to other people who have cancer or people who have family members who have cancer, things that you can think about as you go into treatment, things that you can put into your list of things to research or questions to ask, etc. And each chapter is broken down into several sections, which we'll talk about, but there are action items at the end of each that give you bullet points for things that you can do in terms of each of those 12 lessons that the book is broken up into. So let's go ahead and turn to the interview, because Kelley can explain it much more thoroughly than I can. Again, A Way Back to Health, 12 Lessons from a Cancer Survivor. Let's get to the interview with Kelley. Hi, Kelley. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Sarah. It's great to be here.
It is very nice to have you here. We are here to talk about your book, Lessons from a Cancer Survivor. Before we get to the book, if you could share a little bit about yourself, that would be wonderful.
Yeah, sure. So I am the author of A Way Back to Health, 12 Lessons from a Cancer Survivor, which we'll be talking about today. It's actually my second book. I've previously written a book on the topic of marketing to women. That book is called Too Busy to Shop, Marketing to Multi-Minding Women, and I wrote it several years ago because my professional work is marketing communications And I've done that for decades at a big agency for many years where I ran a global brand marketing practice. And now on my own for the past 5 years, I do marketing consulting and marketing communications for KS Consulting and Capital, and that's my own company. So I do that professionally, as well as about 5 years ago, I started angel investing, meaning kind of pre-venture capital investing in female-led startup companies. And so along with a group of about 50 other women, I'm invested in, 50 or so female-led startup companies from around the country, which has been an amazing experience and very rewarding. Of course, the jobs I like best are being a wife and a mom. Wife to my husband, David, and I have two terrific kids, one who just graduated from college and one who just started college. So it's been a really busy time here at the Skoloda household.
It sounds like it. And thank you for the correction on the title. I knew as I was saying it that I was missing half of it.
Yeah, no problem.
So I have it written down. I just didn't have that in front of me as I said it. So
nope.
Can you give an overview of the book?
I can. So A Way Back to Health is really my personal story of my journey with cancer, but supplemented by lots of stories from cancer survivors who also give their perspectives on the topics that I covered. And when I was diagnosed with cancer, I was in my 50s. I was diagnosed as a result of my very first colonoscopy. And, I'm fairly educated, fairly experienced, have, experienced the healthcare system over time, but experiencing cancer really threw me for a loop. And I learned so much that I started just writing things down. And before I knew it, I thought I had enough information that I had learned that I started to scope out a book around it. And it was really designed to capture the learnings that I had in my journey, thinking that in talking with other people, they could really be helpful for others. So that's really what the book is about.
And it sounds like it was a process coming to decide to write the book, but was there any one or two things that instigated you deciding to actually write this for publication?
Yeah, Sarah, there were a couple of key things that happened that really prompted it. I'm a pretty private person. So when I was diagnosed, I really kept it to myself, dealt with it just amongst my immediate family. But I had lost a lot of weight. I couldn't work as much as I previously had. I dropped off the radar a bit. And so I felt like I just wasn't being true to who I was or being true to the people that I knew. So I decided that I needed to share it in some way. So I drafted a quick story and posted it on my social channels, but also on Medium. And this was before I knew I would have to go through chemo and all of the other things, but just explained what happened. And when I posted that story on Medium, I just got the most overwhelming responses from people of support, of comfort, but also messages like, oh, I'm going to encourage my husband or my sister or my mom or my, someone I know to go get tested. They're overdue for this test, or I haven't had my colonoscopy yet. Your story made me schedule it. So when I realized the profound effect that sharing your personal story could have, I thought, oh, maybe there's something more to this. And I'm a writer by profession, and so I tend to capture things in writing anyway. I had already started to jot notes about things, and I keep extensive notes on my health anyway. So that really prompted me to think, maybe there's something more to this, and maybe I could share lessons in a longer format that would be helpful to people. And when I started to circulate the idea of putting it in a book, and then as I went along my book journey, I would socialize things like the title or the cover of the book or different stories, and got amazing feedback. And so that just kept reinforcing that there was something there. so that, the feedback from people that they could really benefit from the story was what really prompted me and what kept me going.
You mentioned that people had mentioned your weight loss on social media, and that was one of the things in the book that struck me was when some people mentioned it in concern and other people mentioned it with, you look great. And it was one of those things of just, sometimes I'm fascinated by social media and people's responses, and this isn't to call any people out. It's just amazing that, you've got cancer and people are like, you've lost weight, you look great.
Yeah.
I just think that's indicative of a lot of things.
Yeah, it was interesting. I had those reactions mostly before I had told anyone. So I'm a relatively small in stature person anyway, and when you lose 10-15% of your weight, it's pretty significant. And some people before they knew would say, "Wow, you're really trim, or you're really in shape." And that was part of what made me tell people, because I felt like I was just being disingenuous, even though it's a private matter, and you know, it's a hard topic to cover. I just felt like that was actually one of the triggers that I thought, I just have to let people know. I don't want to lead people to believe something that is not true. So that was actually, it seems like a small thing, but it was actually pretty meaningful to me.
It is time to go ahead and take our first break of the podcast. When we come back, we'll be talking a little bit more about the other survivors that are featured in the book and how Kelley came to choose the stories of those survivors to include. So stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I'll be right back.
Golden State Media Concepts bring you the Bible Study Podcast. Reflect and journey the Bible as together we study God's Word and be inspired. Bible study made fun and informative for all ages. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Bible Study Podcast.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and my interview with author Kelley Murray Skoloda. Let's go ahead and return to the interview.
And you also talk a little bit about this in the book, but can you talk about how you came to include other women's stories and how you even went about choosing, because there's so many people who have experiences like this.
Right. There are so many people. And, I guess intellectually, it. You read the statistics. I read a lot. I do a lot of healthcare work. But until you go into a cancer center in a hospital as a patient, and until you go into an infusion center and you see every chair filled every time you go in there, it really never hit home how many people it does affect. So it was amazing to me, how many people are actually affected by something like that. As part of my editing journey, I had an excellent editor for the book, and she was reviewing my initial manuscript after it had already been accepted by the publisher. And she said, this is a really interesting story, and what would make it even better is if you would include stories of other survivors and their perspectives on your topics, because different people have different takes on the same topic. And I thought, you're right. I have been talking to other survivors, and their takes are often similar, but sometimes different as well. And so I did, I had talked to many people, so I just specifically asked people that I had talked to if they would like to be included, and many did. And then I did an open call on my book website and just asked people, if you have a story you'd like to share on these topics, please reach out. And you know how social media works. Friends of friends of friends started contacting me. So I did have many people who bounced back and said, yes, I would like to share my story. And that really added to the depth and richness and texture, I think, of how people treat different topics. And in fact, in particular, there was a woman I used to work with, Andrea, and she's a breast cancer survivor. And she wrote back to me and said, sure, I'll give you my perspectives on this, this, and this. But one topic you didn't ask about, and I think is really important, is the financial burden of having cancer. And I thought, you're so right. It was something that was big, and like the weight of the world on your shoulders when you get bills that are hundreds of thousands of dollars. But it was not something I originally included in the outline. So not only did I get varying perspectives, but I also got reminders of things that are really important that I had forgotten. So it was a great process, and I think really added to the value of the book.
Yeah, for me, actually, that was one story that I was amazed at the person who actually was sent to a financial advisor planner as part of her treatment plan, and the way that they went through everything and said, yep, here's what your insurance will cover. Here's what you need to know. That would be so helpful if it were more readily available, or more people knew to seek that out.
Absolutely. And that did not happen to me. And I think, with any major illness, gosh, that should be, a mandatory part of the process. It would be, for me, I'm a knowledge is power person. I want to know what I'm getting into. It makes me feel better. So just knowing those kinds of things in advance, that this is what you'll be responsible for, but knowing so much of it will be covered would be a great relief.
Absolutely. A large part of the book is your own experience, but you also include some studies and some scientific journal mentions. What types of research did you do while writing the book?
To make a long story short, I did a lot of research. I started with an outline of topics that I thought were my top lessons, that I thought people, and talking to them, did not know that if I shared, they could benefit from. And then, of course, as any good writer would, you go out and look and see if, is there data that supports it or not, or, what's the general kind of scientific consensus around it. And so that's what I did. And I found that there was actually a lot of data and support for the anecdotal lessons that I had learned. And so in every single chapter, every step along the way, for every lesson that I pulled out, I did extensive research and looked at studies. I looked at corroborating evidence. I looked at contradictory evidence, and really tried to bring that facts and data approach to the book too. So it does start with stories, and it also includes stories along the way, but I was very cognizant of making sure that there was data to support what I was saying as well. So it's not medical advice per se. None of this is. It's still a personal journey, but it's very much supported by statistical information as well.
What do you hope then that people will take from the book when they read it?
I guess a key takeaway would be to advocate for yourself in this kind of situation. In any type of serious health situation, you are your own best advocate, and you have to speak up. I guess what I found was that a lot of people trust the healthcare system to do that for them. And while there are so many smart and wonderful people, no one knows you or your body or your mind like you do. So you have to speak up. And I found that it was important every step along the way for me to trust my instincts about that. And sometimes what I was feeling was contrary to what someone was recommending to me. And that was causing tension. And in the end, every time I listened to my instincts, it worked out well for me. So trust your instincts and be prepared to be your own advocate would be, I think, the two top takeaways of the entire book.
Yeah, absolutely. In terms of the structure of the book, I liked the way each chapter was set up, because each chapter was a different lesson or something to think about. But then there's a longer part of the chapter, and then kind of summary paragraphs of the chapter, and then
Right.
just steps of things. So really, depending on how focused you are on any given day, you could read through everything, or you could read through the summary paragraphs, or maybe you just need some bullet points. Did you start out writing it that way, or did that evolve?
I'm so glad you mentioned that, and thank you for for pointing that out, because that was exactly the intent from the very beginning. I'm a kind of naturally a bulleted kind of person, and I see things in a structure, and I'm also an action person and like to kind of do my homework, but then quickly distill it and be able to take some sort of action on it. For me, that makes me feel better. So I structured the book around what my kind of natural thinking pattern is, especially in a time of crisis. But it was very much set up to do exactly what you just described. If someone wanted to pick it up and read one chapter, you can do that. You don't have to, it doesn't have to be consecutive. Even though my journey is kind of chronological, you can pick up and open it to any chapter if that pertains to you and read it and be done with it. Or you could go straight to the action items, and you could go to the action items in each chapter and just take those things away. So what your experience with it is exactly how it was intended to be used and read. Pick it up and use it as you need to, because not just because that's my natural way of doing things, but also because as someone who was handling a serious illness, oftentimes I did not have time to dig into everything, and I thought other people would be the same. Sometimes you just need to read something quickly and get some answers or some help and move on. So it was meant to be helpful in a short form way, so that you don't have to take so much of your precious time to dig in to find something that might be helpful.
And it's also helpful if you've read the whole thing, or however much you've read of it, but you can't remember where you found something. You can go to those action items at the end and be like, there it is, and then go back to the chapter to find more detail.
Exactly.
Did the writing of the book, I don't know if change it, well, let me rephrase that. Did you take away anything new from your experience of writing the book?
Writing the book, Sarah, was really, it was hard. I didn't realize when I embarked on it how hard it would be to relive some of those really painful moments again and again. And so you relive it when you write it the first time, you relive it when you edit it, you really, and there's as you know, a lot of editing, a lot of revisiting of a manuscript. And then in the final editing process, reading it through, from beginning to end, time and time and time again. Sometimes there were times where I just couldn't do it. I would get into it and I would get so emotional. And even now, just talking about it, I can actually feel it in my chest. It brings you to a point where I don't want to go again. And so that part of it was really hard and I guess to some degree unexpected. And so when I set out to do it, I just didn't realize that would be, a part of the book writing process. The other part that I guess I didn't expect was just how much continuing support I would continue to get. As I mentioned earlier, I would socialize on social media channels, things like the cover or the title or different stories. And every time I did that, it was some of the most highly circulated, commented on social posts I've ever had. And I have a pretty good following and a pretty responsive community, but they just were so kind of excited and happy and helpful. My community helped make decisions about those kinds of things. So that was something else that I wasn't prepared for, but was really happy to see.
It's time for our second break of the podcast. As we go into that break, I will say it's amazing where we find community sometimes, or where our community is reinforced. We'll be talking more about community when we come back, so stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I will be right back.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast. I am speaking today with Kelley Murray Skoloda about her memoir, A Way Back to Health, 12 Lessons from a Cancer Survivor. Let's return to that interview.
I'm sure you have community from the experience of going through cancer and treatment, but has writing the book and sharing it through social channels, has that expanded that community for you?
It definitely has expanded the community in a couple of ways. One, specifically with the cancer community, I'm now connected to a lot of people who are either survivors or trying to help survivors, or pharmaceutical companies, or just companies and people in general who are interested in trying to do good things for people who have cancer. And it's also, I think, just expanded my, pre-cancer community in many ways. People are just, generous in spirit, and also so very kind. Anytime I go to a business meeting, I was at a client meeting a few weeks ago, and one of the first things one of my clients said was, how are you feeling? Is everything okay? People are just genuinely, I think, really kind at heart. And, so it's, the community has really rallied.
Which is wonderful.
It is.
Can you talk a little bit more about Cancer Be Glammed, which is mentioned several times throughout the book?
Oh, sure. I'd love to. So, I guess it's one of those things, but, I don't know, things happen for a reason. Anyway, when I embarked on my own business, KS Consulting and Capital, a few years ago, 5 years ago, one of my business colleagues said, "Oh, you have to meet Lisa Laurie. She's the co-founder of Cancer Be Glammed, and she's doing great things, and she's coming out with a new book, and your communication skills might be able to help her." So I met Lisa, and she is just, a lovely, smart, wonderful person who is a breast cancer survivor. And she started an organization called Cancer Be Glammed, trying to help women battling any form of cancer, do it through kind of making themselves look better, feel better. And she offers all kinds of resources to help with that. And she found that when she was going through her cancer and chemo and hair loss and weight loss and losing both of her breasts, whenever she kind of felt better and looked better, she had a better outlook on life. So she's really dedicated her life to doing that for other people. So I met with Lisa and talked to her, and here she was coming out with a new book and an inflection point in her Cancer Be Glammed business. And so I took her on as a client and helped her launch her book and work with her. And right when that was happening, I went in for my colonoscopy. I was diagnosed. And wouldn't you know it, I had my surgery 1 week before she launched her book. So I was working on her book launch while I myself was diagnosed with cancer and going to have to be a cancer survivor. So, I mean, ironic in some ways, but also super helpful. She's been such a wonderful resource personally and professionally. Um, she was such a comfort to me when I was going through my diagnosis, a real help. And she continues to do that in major ways. And I keep in contact with her often, and she continues Cancer Be Glammed in an even bigger and better way now. So it was just, one of those blessings that, you have no idea how it will turn out, but turned out to be a blessing in many ways.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And the timing is amazing.
It is uncanny. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. This is your second book. Maybe
Yes.
not a book you expected to write. Are you working on anything new, whether it's a book or essays, anything like that?
Oh, Sarah, that's a good question. Once a writer, always a writer, right? I feel like I always have something percolating. I had started a book years ago that was a kind of a combination memoir about my grandmother, but also part cookbook because she was the most amazing Italian cook. And I envisioned it being advice and recipes. And I still have an outline for that on my laptop. And I am a gratitude journalist as well. So I, on a daily basis, kind of chronicle my gratitude and keep notes on that. Nothing that I would ever share publicly, but that's something that I work on all the time. And I guess I'm just a note taker of life. I keep a notebook on my desktop, and I take notes on pretty much every conversation that I have. So who knows what will happen next? I mean, a book is a labor of love, right? So, right, this book took a lot out of me, so I can't say that I'm, pursuing anything immediately, but there's always something percolating.
Yeah, I can imagine that this one would need just a little time before you
It
potentially
does.
jumped into anything else.
It does.
So you've written in a variety of capacities throughout your life at time, it sounds like, but was writing for publication something that you always wanted to do, or did you come to that decision later in life? How did that work for you?
I think, well, maybe not a stated goal. It was something that I always had in the back of my mind. When I wrote my first book, the way that it happened was that I had, in my professional capacity, I was often quoted in the media. And so, I don't know, Time or Fortune or Huffington Post would pick up a quote or something that I did, and I would write op-eds and have those published. And so I had things published in some of the trade publications that I work in, Ad Age or Brand Week. And I wrote something for Brand Week and had an editor, an acquisitions editor, contact me and say, this could be a full-length book if you wanted it to be. And I bounced back and said, oh my gosh, something I'd never thought of. But I kept that email in my inbox for a year. And it just must have planted a seed in the back of my mind. And I would look at it and think, maybe. But that was actually the impetus for me to write my first book, when someone said, your article could be a full-length book. And so I rounded back with him and said, I've done a lot of thinking about it. What would I need to do? And it was my first foray into publishing. And he, told me what I would need to do for him. And then I, wrote the book proposal, and that's a very complex. The book proposal is almost as long as the book itself in some cases. It's a big full-time job, takes a lot of time, but I embarked on it. And anyway, that's how I ended up having my first book published. So I guess there was some fertile ground, and that planted the seed. And then it, once this happened, my idea for the second book, publishing has changed so rapidly over the past years. I thought, well, I guess I'll have to explore a whole new territory here. And a lot has changed, but a lot hasn't. And seeking a publisher was similar. So I knew what that process was and was able to navigate it more nimbly and faster, and able to produce a book pretty quickly. So I always say publishing a book is like going to college again. You learn so much every time you do it. But that was how those two happened.
From your experience, would you have advice for someone who may be thinking about writing a memoir or writing nonfiction, which is, a bit different than publishing fiction? Would you have advice for aspiring authors?
Right. I would have advice. And you're right. They're two very different genres. And for me, two things, I guess. When you go to submit a book proposal, everyone wants to know about your platform. So having some sort of voice and presence through social media, through your work, being a thought leader in some way, I think is incredibly helpful, because a publisher knows if you're going the traditional publishing route, the publisher knows that you have an audience and a community out there. And I did, and I think that really helped me tremendously. The other advice I would have is really spend time on creating a really great outline. A strong outline is something that a publisher will want to see, first of all. But secondly, as a writer, it's something that you can turn to when you're, in my case, emotional and not quite thinking clearly about a really tough subject, or when you just have writer's block. With my first book, I would sit down to write, and I think I'm a disciplined writer, and I think that helps. Writing every day whenever you're writing a book. And I would sit down sometimes and think, oh my gosh, what do I write about today? And if I just go back to my outline, and my outline says I'm writing about this in this chapter, and I need to do this research and conduct this interview, then it all starts, then you can piece it together. So, having that really strong outline gave me tremendous guidance in times of kind of emotional trouble or writer's block.
And it's time for our final break of the podcast. When we come back, we'll be talking about what Kelley likes to read in her personal time. So stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I'll be right back.
Golden State Media Concepts Sci-Fi Podcast. Together we dive into the world of sci-fi and science fiction. From episodes of Star Trek, Star Wars, to The Walking Dead, Resident Evil, all the hot new science fiction movies from the back doors of Marvel or DC. The Golden State Media Concepts Sci-Fi Podcast. You'll never look at science fiction the same way again.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and the conclusion of my interview with author Kelley Murray Skoloda.
Thank you for that. When you take the time to read for yourself, I don't know how much time you have for that. It sounds like you're pretty busy, but do you have favorite authors or genres that you turn to for your personal reading?
So as you might expect, Sarah, I am a huge reader. I have a huge library in my home. I have books everywhere. I'm a big buyer of like real books. And in fact, every couple of years, I need to just clean my shelves of my books, and I donate them to a library or Goodwill, or give them away to anyone who wants them, because I buy so many books. I would say I don't know that I have a favorite author per se, but I do like nonfiction, and I tend to read a lot of business books. And I really love books about kind of the startup world, and inspirational stories of business and people who overcome, all kinds of hurdles to achieve great things. And so I have probably more than most people would have nonfiction on their shelves. And I also know a lot of authors in my business life. I've met and come across many, many authors. And so, of course, I have all of their books on my bookshelf. So, it's a combination, but probably a lot more nonfiction in my house than most people would have.
Sure. I know you have a website, so if you can share that, as well as any social media that you're available on for people to find you.
Sure, I'd be happy to. So the book website, if anyone is interested in just looking into more background or understanding the story of the book can be found at awaybacktohealth.com. And my business website, if someone is interested in looking at that, because I intertwine my book work and my business work oftentimes, that is ksconsultingandcapital.com. It's a long one, but if you just spell it out that way, you'll find me there. Also, I am on Instagram and Facebook, but the social channel I use the most is LinkedIn, and I use it for my book work, for my professional work, and even some of my sharing some of my personal life. And so if anyone goes to LinkedIn and you just look at Kelley Skoloda, and it's KELLEY SKOLODA, you can find me there, and I'm pretty active there and have a very active community. So those are the social and online places you can find me.
All right, thank you. Well, Kelley, we've talked about the book, we've talked about writing, we've talked about a variety of different things, but is there anything else that you would like to share, or that you would like people to know during our time together?
What people have told me is that this book makes a really nice gift for someone who they might not know what to get for, because they themselves are going through a really tough health scare, or someone in their family is caring for them. And so a lot of people have said to me, I'm buying this book for my friend, she's caring for her mother, or someone in my family was just diagnosed with cancer. I'm going to gift this book to them. It seems like it's the right touch for that situation, where you want to do something nice for someone, but you want to do also, do something that's serious and not kind of fluffy. This book makes a really good gift for someone in that situation. So, I hadn't originally thought about that, but I've been told that enough times that I think it's probably good advice.
Yeah, people always want to know what they can do, and this is something practical.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So thank you for that. And thank you so much for taking the time today to talk to me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Sarah. Really enjoyed talking with you, and always appreciate the opportunity to talk about the book. Perhaps someone will pick it up and it will be of help to them.
Absolutely. Thank you again.
Thank you once again to Kelley for taking the time to talk to me about this book. And I agree. I think that if you know someone who has a cancer diagnosis, or you know someone who has a family member with a cancer diagnosis, this might be a good resource for them, because as we talked about in the interview, it is accessible in a variety of different ways. So depending on how you read or how you search for things in a book, there are a few different ways to find things within the book. And you could take all 12 lessons. You can just kind of scroll or skim through and see which ones might make sense to you at any given time, etc. I will say, I didn't want to say this at the beginning of the episode, I wanted Kelley's interview to come first, but I will say that this was a very difficult interview for me, not because of Kelley. Kelley was lovely, but I did not expect this to be this hard. As some of you know, if you've been listening for a while, my dad died of cancer a little over 5 months ago, and the way my schedule is, this interview was scheduled probably 6 to 8 months ago, so before that happened. And so when it came up on my reading schedule and I sat down, I started reading it, it hit me pretty hard. And it was tough to get through the interview without hyperventilating or crying. I crochet, and I always crochet during interviews, helps keep me focused. But this time I found myself crocheting like a mad woman. Like I was crocheting to ward off a full-blown panic attack. So thank you to Kelley for sharing her experiences, and writing this book as a resource for others who, there's a lot of people who could benefit from the lessons within this book. My family could have benefited from some of these lessons, but reading through some of her experiences, obviously she had a very different experience than my dad did, but it just brought up a lot of different memories. But thank you to Kelley for writing the book, for sharing her experiences, and my apologies to her or to you if I sound stressed in the interview, or if I sound weird, or Kelley if I acted weird when we were speaking. I was having a moment there. I'm feeling a little better now that I've had a few days to process, but the day of the interview was tough, and we had some technical issues when we first started to try, and that didn't help my mental state, but doing better now. So thank you again to Kelley, and thank you as always to you, my listeners. If you are a fan of the podcast and you haven't done so, but would like to, you just haven't gotten around to it, please do the following things that can help get this podcast out to more listeners. You can like, follow, subscribe on whatever platform you listen to the podcasts on. That means that you will get a notification whenever there's a new episode. You can also leave a review, written or starred, either way helps. And you can follow on social media and interact with me, ask me questions, something. Leave me comments. I don't know, however you want to interact on social media, but you can do that on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. And I look forward to potentially hearing from you. Hope you're having a great week so far. We have another episode coming up. I had 2 interviews over the weekend. The next episode will feature author J. Michael White, and the first in his new young adult urban fantasy series. The book is called Just in Case. Yes, Just in Case. It's a pun. It's supposed to be there. Just in Case, and the Masters of Dragon Metal. So join me for that, especially if you are a fan of YA and urban fantasy. Again, I hope you're having a great week. Hope that week continues to go well. And of course, I hope that week involves plenty of time for you to find yourself lost in a good book. Thank you so much.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.